This is the Ops Game Changers podcast, where we share real-life stories from remarkable leaders that are transforming the world of service operations in financial services, healthcare, and BPOs. In this series, we explore some of the key challenges faced by service operations as they strive to deliver more capacity, more productivity, and more business impact. In each episode, we delve into how these Ops Game Changers have addressed a key challenge or issue. Our guests share how they went about unlocking significant value, adopting best practices, and experiencing some game-changing results.
Hello and welcome to Ops Game Changers, the podcast series that shines a light on the crucial role that operations teams have in driving business performance and improving staff and customer experience. My name is Bhavesh Vagela. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at ActiveOps, and in each episode I'll be honing in on a particular KPI or a particular challenge that a business has solved. I'll delve into how they went about doing this and explore the outcomes achieved. Today we're delighted to have Tom Frosina join us. Tom's the head of card operations up at TD Bank. And I guess you could say Tom and his team are pioneers in transforming this whole idea of connecting front and back office. Really the concept of trying to share capacity amongst those groups, with a key driver obviously to improve customer experience. So that's the topic for today. And before we jump into that topic, it's about time we introduce Tom. So Tom, welcome to Ops Game Changers. Thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, great to be here. Thank you, Bhavesh, for having me.
So Tom, I always ask this question of all the ops leaders, all the Ops Game Changers that come into the podcast. I'm curious to know how you ended up where you ended up. How did you end up in operations?
Wow. I think when I first came out of school, I started to work actually for Citibank. This is way back in the mid 80s. I was working in their branch network. It was a role I had, and I did work branches for a number of years, close to 10 years in New York. But the part that really excited me, even though I tended to be more on the front office, dealing with customers and all that, at times also was working with the back office teams that worked in other parts of the bank, and I got to kind of know them. And at one point, after about 10 years, one of them I'd gone to a session where they actually invited me out to a call center and operations center, which I had never seen before. And I really had a great visit and talk with these guys. And a week later, they said, hey, we've actually got an opening to learn the call center. You've got really great experience in how the branches work. We'd love you to kind of join the team. And, that happened in 1994, and I pretty much have never looked back.
That's fantastic. I think it's actually, it's quite a common trajectory where ops leaders come from working in different parts of the bank, which I think it's really fascinating that happens. So, listen, before we jump into the topic at hand, I guess when we think about TD Bank, I think you're America's most convenient bank. I think that's the phrase that goes with it.
Tagline. Yep.
That's the tagline. I guess it comes with a whole load of pressure, right? You've got to drive great customer experience for your customers. I think you've got circa 10 million customers, a large workforce. And I know you've got a large operations team. So how do you go about managing day-to-day operations at such a scale? I mean, that must be some feat.
It is. Well, again, not all 10 million are necessarily my charges per se with the overall bank, but, in our credit card division, we have probably, close to 2 million customers. Many of them are overlap. And also, too, one of the divisions I work with actually came into this organization was our private label sales finance. So these customers actually are not ours directly, they're our partners. So they're doing financing. For example, they might go into a large furniture retailer, want to purchase some furniture and then want to do the financing. We're the ones who are doing it. So we also have to have not only the consumer, but we also have that partner who wants to be very happy with the service that we're providing them, their pieces, all that. So really it's just focusing on what's most important to it. So, yes, the end consumers are a most important game. And I think to the first question you asked me, one of the things I think that's helped me in my career is I've never wanted to be too far from the consumer. I think when you get deeper into an organization and lose track of, hey, that consumer is only one or two people away, or the people who are actually handling those contacts, be it a frontline person talking on the phones or in a back office, they know the experience. So I think what really helps me get through is understanding what do I need to do, what do my teams need to do, who's focusing on the consumer, who's focusing on the partners, and making sure these groups are constantly talking. Because when one goes off and the others, in one extreme, one goes off, we're going to lose that connection, and that service is definitely going to suffer. And then ultimately our business.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I guess that's a good segue to kind of what we're going to be talking about
Yeah.
today in terms of the topic. And, we're seeing a growing trend, I think not just from the US, but actually across the world, of this idea of, how do I use my resources that I have to my best capability
Hmm.
to drive, in this case, customer experience, or it could be employee experience, or whatever the combination of those are. Or in fact, reduce cost, which is kind of a big chunk of that. And part of that is really, bridging the gap between front and back office, and the contact center and the back office. I know, you guys have been really driving that agenda,
Hmm.
within TD Bank. I mean, maybe if we start at the beginning.
Sure.
I mean, what kind of drove you to do that? What was the thinking behind? Can we actually connect these two?
Well, it's always just some necessity pulled it up, right? We had something that popped, and in one case we had a large amount of volume hitting our back office, right?
Mhm.
And not enough staff necessary to handle it. But also too, we also knew it was a temporary event, right? This wasn't a change where, yes, I'm going to have to hire tens and 20 staff ongoing. Yeah, I might have needed to adjust hiring a little bit, but I really need to get through a bit of a bulge for the
Yeah.
next 3 to 4 months. And then, of course, we've used AOM before. So in our back office, we had put a lot of these metrics in place. So we already knew kind of where our volumes were when they came in.
Mhm.
More importantly, and this is really important, my back office folks started to cross train themselves with different groups.
Right.
Because normally, for example, a lot of the stuff would happen in some of my regulatory businesses, more complex work too. I couldn't necessarily take somebody from the phones and just say, hey, go in and work in this highly technical regulated thing and knock out these claims.
Of
Wasn't
course.
going to work. But what I could do, because we had already done this work, is I could move one of my phone people into my customer service back office here, which was a very similar job, then
Mhm.
move that person one step over, and sometimes move that person one step over. So we're able to do, these 2 or 3-way trades internally to get people who had already had experience, who already had some of the knowledge. Because otherwise, sometimes bringing on new people to an organization that's under a lot of pressure is actually worse, because it actually drags you down, because you've got all these new folks you have to worry about quality and productivity. We were moving people over who had already done that work from time to time too, but we had to replace them and had to replace them. So I think what we did is we worked through that process. But again, yeah, normally in this case it was we had some drivings in different businesses, and we're seeing that overall in business. I think the cycles have changed and moved more rapidly
Mhm.
in my experience in operations. I think a lot of it has to do with the consumer, which is, I harken back to years ago. There was a menswear thing. I'm really aging myself here. He used to say their educated consumer was their best customer,
Right.
which is true. But now the customers have so much information at hand. If they have any questions about a possible fraud, or they see something on their credit score that's changed, they're contacting us right away. And
Exactly.
this can increase our volumes if something happens. Think of a large breach is happening. People
Mhm.
get very concerned where they impacted. Um, During the housing market got really hot here during the pandemic. A lot of people were applying for new. They found out there might have been something on their bureaus that was incorrect. Created a lot more temporary seasonal volume for us. So when these things started happening, we had to be sure that our teams were very flexible to move.
Yeah.
What was lucky for us a lot of times is we've also seen it not hitting the same areas at the same time. Sometimes the phones would get a little bit quiet as we have more digital engagement, but then the back office would have to do some of the work to kind of because now digital engagement is easy, the back office is getting more things to work through as well too.
Good.
So with those changes, we've just have had to remain very flexible. But I'll probably jump to one of the questions you might have later is, what would I have done better? I probably would have practiced a lot more of this stuff before
Mhm.
I had that tidal wave, right? It would have been a lot easier just to try it. Get like, why do you need people here? Our service levels are great. Like, yep, let's get it ready, because you never know when it won't. It turns fairly quickly on that piece as well.
So then I guess you have to react, don't you, fast? And
Yes.
and you alluded to the point about the data being able to do that. Now, before we jump into the data question, what's fascinating for me is you've got two groups there, one back office and one call center, dare I say, who are completely different beasts in terms of the
Yes.
type of individuals working there and the type of work that's required. I mean, how do you, I mean, I guess there's two sides that come from that. One is how do you make sure people are skilled in order
Hmm.
to be able to deliver different types of work and are flexible? And secondly, how do you even get them motivated to even, yes, I'm going to be spending half a day I was doing calls, now I'm doing something else. How does that work?
Right. So, I mean, the one base skill they all tend to share is system knowledge, which I can't underestimate how important that is too. But yeah, it is a very different thing. I've always kind of alluded to, Call centers are like restaurants, right? People
Yeah.
come in when they want to come in. They want to eat the food. The food needs to be fresh. And at the end of the night, if you didn't sell all the fish, you just got to throw it out. Meaning, if you have extra capacity, no one
Okay.
cares. You have a lot of extra capacity at 11:30 at night if people want to eat it at 8 o'clock at night.
Of course.
Back office is completely different. It's a warehouse. Things come in and you can just work that inventory all the way through. And if you have to work later, you can get it out and knock it through. Because the customer has, yes, there's certain expectations the customer has, but it's not necessary in the moment. It might be in a 24-hour period. So I think with our staff is we try to find people who are geared to that. Phone people, yes, it's a very tough job. I'm going to be scheduled. I have to take my calls. But when I'm done, I hang up my headset. I go home. The day is done.
Yes.
Back office, it's a little bit different. It's a different pace, right? I might be able to get up and go grab a cup of coffee if I feel like one at 10:30 in the morning. But by the same token, if the work doesn't get out, we'll really need to have to ask people to work overtime, be more flexible, work through the lunch to get it done. So it's two different mindsets. So I think also too, when we look to move people from the front office to the back office, and we've done it the other way too, but let's focus on this one is we do ask people like, hey, this is what the job entails, right? Some people in the phones will say, hey, I just want to get off the phones. Like, understood, but let's explain what this job will be like. We might need you to stay a little bit later, right? You won't have, your schedule might be changing day to day and how work goes through, and you're going to have to be more self-motivated to keep grabbing the next piece of work versus the work coming to you. It's subtle, but some people have really said, yeah, they want to do it, and they go into the back office and it's like, no, they just can't react to that environment. And that's fine. We bring them back. And also that's one of the things about doing this kind of work that's amazing is people who said they always wanted to get off the phones and go to the back office. Some of them have gone and they have moved on and become careers in the back office and moved up to managers. Others have gone for a week and two and say, never mind, I like what I'm doing here and do it differently. So you have to understand it's just those slight little nuances. So when we do these efforts, we will make sure our managers know what they're looking for and have the other manager contact that manager so they're all aligned and pretty much tap people on the shoulder, give them a couple of minutes to understand how it's going to work, because we don't want to put them in a bad spot. And of course, we don't want to put ourselves in a bad spot.
Yeah, no, totally. And I guess over time, as you've been doing this, you create a kind of a mid pool, don't you? Of people that are going to go back and forth.
Yes.
And that just gives you the ability to flex that I guess that capacity, right? Depending on what's happening in the business as you go along. So, what was the reaction from staff then when you started to do this? Was it trepidation or was it positive?
I think for the most part, it was positive trepidations. I'll take both of your words. I think, yes, you're excited to do it. It's something different, and they want to learn something new. But of course, people are normally nervous. It's a little bit of a change, getting into new work, new routines, new management, things like that. But I think, once they get through the first couple of weeks, they realize it's different than the phones. But again, maybe not so different. If I'm doing a back office customer request to change an address, update a profile, it's what I used to do when they were on the phone. It's just a different pace, slightly different processes. And then as they get used to that, a lot of them have said, look, now they can migrate up, kind of upstream to a more difficult work type all the way to our regulatory pieces. They really kind of enjoy that journey and things like that. And again, it gives us some career paths and different opportunities for our folks as well. So yeah, I think no one just kind of jumps in and says, yeah, I can knock this out of the park. They understand that they're going to have to learn and go through those pieces. But again, we got the data, so we also understand, if the people aren't doing very well, we might just say, hey, thanks for trying.
Yeah.
Maybe the phone's better for you. And then also too, down the road, when we've had openings in the department, we know a pool of people that say, hey, these are opening, but you really like this work. We like when you were here. We should make sure that you put your name into the hat when we come down the road too on improvement. But again, the most important thing for us too as a business was we get these seasonal pushes. So I talked about earlier with you prior to this, we're having one of our major retailers are doing a big push of a sale today, and they do this twice a year. But after they do the sale, we'll get some incremental volume on fraud and things like that because they do an enormous push at once. So I will have to then deal with that maybe in our back office. While I'm dealing with on the phones today, I'll deal with that in the back office 45 to 60 days. Yeah. I'm already figuring out, so come that day sometime in October, I'll have to move a few people back from the front office to help that volume out. But I can't go to my bosses and say, I need to hire up 20 people, then get rid of them, then hire them up again, then get rid of them.
Work,
this is, it doesn't work at all, nor is it a smart business move. But this has really allowed us to flex it. And again, the phone centers, we have amazing information with the tools, the switches. We know everything, volumes and all that. The
Mhm.
back office is something we didn't have. We had an AOM. I first started with the AOM when I was with Barclays back in the UK in the
Mhm.
early, 2010s. And then I brought it in here back in 2018, 2019 to my back office here. Now we have that same data. So now we know when these things are happening.
Mhm.
We can start to understand when it's creeping in and what moves we need to make. And also too, we know what our capacity is going to be like. So if we're going to have one of these surge events, is it the same time we have another search event that maybe we've got two things coming at the same time? Or maybe we have a lull in another part of my back office operation and they
Yes.
can actually kind of, take care of it internally. So with having this data then married up with, hey, how my phone center is looking in October. They look not great this week. Like, for example, we rarely move these people on Mondays because that's our very busy day in the call centers.
Sure.
Tends to not be a super busy day in the back office because they tend to get mail come in Mondays and they work that on Tuesday. So by having the data from both sides, we can really make some more educated
Yeah.
decisions on when we want to send folks
Mm.
over and when we need to move them back as well.
That's really interesting. I think that I guess it comes down to visibility, doesn't it? You've got that data on both sides, even though they're measuring different things depending on the front
Yep.
versus back, but you're seeing a clearer picture. Was that kind of really the game changer for you, bringing the data together in order to see your resources in its entirety rather than the specific groups? And if that was the case, what was the journey of, for the data? How did you get about providing that level of insight for yourselves?
Yeah, I think anecdotally we always knew it, but the data helped firm our decisions up to say
Okay.
this is the right thing to do. But also it helped us do it. So we said, let's move 20 people over. Like, you know what? Really, we only need about 7, right?
Yeah.
20 would have been overkill. We would have put our phone systems in danger too. I think again with the phone side, we always had the data. I argue, an hour in the phone system, you could spend a month going through the data, right? The back
Yeah.
office, we didn't have that until we brought in things and brought in AOM to do that work for us. So now my managers can actually self-manage, and they're not managing. They kind of know what they need to do the next couple of hours, they need to do this week, and what they know what the next month's going to be. And of course, things get a little fuzzy when you go out, but now we've got a couple of years of history.
Mhm.
It's feeling pretty good. So even when we had something like the pandemic, which completely threw volumes, because for a little while we had no front volume, right? There was no sales going on, but other volumes started to come in from consumers and things like that. We were able to quickly adjust our people and staffing because we kind of said, you know what, we've seen this before and in a smaller effect. Here's the multiplier of it. This is the kind of staff we're going to need, and we can work through that. And then, now we've really kind of married up the data. So when I have kind of my group calls, I had one early this morning, I have my back office folks talking, my front office people talking, and we're already kind of seeing, okay, what does it look like the rest of this week? What does it look like the next couple of weeks? Is there
Yeah.
anything big on the horizon that we need to start planning for? And, I do that at a high level, but more importantly, these guys are doing it day to day in their teams and with each other,
Yeah.
and the teams are starting to cross pollinate. And when they start doing that, then my job becomes far more easier because it's just kind of becomes a self-adjusting system.
Yeah, totally. I guess that's the key, right? Because you provide the data and the insights that enable your teams to
Right.
flex and react, and particularly do that in real time, or as close to real time as possible, in order to, you know,
Mhm.
solve the business challenges that you're
Right.
faced with. And that's a fascinating kind of position that you're in. So as you've been doing this and as you've been kind of sharing resources, have you seen kind of a big improvement, say in the utilization of capacity? Have you seen better customer experience? What has been the output of some of this?
Oh yeah. So absolutely on those pieces too. So for example, right now, because of where we are the cycles in the business, and actually our front office has very, very low attrition, which
Mhm.
is for a call center a great thing. But
Yeah,
actually, when your volumes are coming down a little bit and you have low attrition, then you're kind of overstaffed a bit.
of
So if
course.
we had done none of this right now, my front office would be hitting 95+% service levels, which is overperforming to some degree, right? We're answering that phone so quick the customer doesn't have a second to wait. Not
Yeah,
that you want to wait, but a second or two is not too traumatic. But my back office was seeing some extra volumes coming in due to the changes. So I'd have one group doing really well and one group just burning out on the other side. So by able to do this and be able to figure this out pretty early, hey, we can move people over, we can solve this ourselves. I would say in the past we would have treated these as separate systems. We would have said, oh, I need to get 10 more people in my back office. Well, your front office, yeah, but they're separate things. not anymore. I mean, what we really do now is we solve it for ourselves. And only when we find something in the back office that says, look, this trend in the back office is not going to change. I'm going to need 5 additional staff, because eventually some of these phone people need to go back. Then I can make a more educated decision, say, look, here's what we were able to do. Here's what we saw, versus just trying to throw people at it, which if you throw people at it, it's not necessarily meaning it's going to solve the problem. If it's a short-term issue, then you're going to have another issue down the road where my back office is overstaffed. My front end might be in a different shape. So it really allows us to kind of marry up these two things and just constantly course adjust. And I would tell you, for probably 80–90% of the time, we're able to handle it. I mean, one big thing is we're putting in another new system in one of our other areas for our credit, and we still have the old system. So we have the new system and the old system that we're working kind of, we're working in parallel as we offload the old onto the new. Both have back office work that has to be done on the systems, things that kind of fall out naturally, fall out to be worked.
Of course.
But now, because we have both systems, we have double that fallout work until we get onto one. So normally, we originally had planned with the rollout to say we might have to take a pause before we roll out new clients. We said, you know what? We don't have to do it. I says, we have enough people in our front office that I can spare over there. We can keep running this thing in parallel, because the faster we get it done, the faster we're on the path to just the one system. Instead of dragging this thing out over 8 or 9 months, we can get it done over 8 or 9 weeks. So that's something we can get back to the business. Doesn't cost them anything extra, right? We didn't have to go and hire staff to do this. And we got through a cycle, we got to get a change cycle much quicker. And on the other side of that change cycle was better service for our customers, actually improved approval rates for our customers, which meant more business for us overall. Again, just having being able to flex 3 or 4 people could make that happen.
It's really interesting, because it sounds like such a simple thing to do.
Yeah.
But it's not, is it? I mean, it's a difficult task when you have thousands of employees in both sides to flex those resources.
I've always enjoyed, I think I've been pretty lucky. I mean, I've always had pretty much front and back offices together. I think, even when I went to, we started the story here, when I went to the call center, we had created this call center. It was only a call center, it was in San Antonio, Texas. And most of the branch networks were in big cities, New York, San Francisco, things in Chicago. They built the call center in Texas for various reasons. Then they eventually started to bring the ops in. So as they brought the operations in from these marketplaces, us phone people had to help get them started, kind of incubate them too. And that's when I kind of really learned, like, we can really start to connect these, because historically they were not connected. Different divisions, different groups. Yes, they might have at some senior VP level might have met, but they didn't talk to each other on a daily basis. Now they were in our same building. Now they were a lot of times our same people. We helped seed those groups. So when I kind of learned that back in the mid to late 90s when we built, I said, this is something I'm going to do going forward. And when I worked at other jobs, be it at Capital One, Cigna, Barclays, I always had a front and back office, and I always enjoyed having that. Some people, I work with peers and things like that, they chose one or the other. I always chose both, just to get this flexibility. Also, too, is, if you don't do your front office right, you can bury your back office.
Oh, completely.
Yeah, and vice versa. If the back office doesn't do certain things, they can do it the other way too. So I was like, no, we're going to the same team. We're going to figure out how to get work down to the back office that they can work on and action correctly, not have to go back and correct and go back to the customer and try to get approvals. But again, also was able to move these people, move managers around, and really build those synergies.
Yeah, and it as I said, it's very logical, and it's it's obvious that that's going to be there, but it's harder to do than actually think about. So I guess if you're thinking it through, and clearly you guys have got a kind of well-oiled machine in that sense, that's being able to flex, and you've demonstrated great value to the business. If you were going to advise one of your peers that perhaps is going to go down this path, what would you kind of say is, the 2 or 3 things that you must do, or your gotchas, or what tips would you give?
Well, I think the first tip I would give is don't immediately, think about making kind of those double trades, right? Don't assume you can take a person that's inexperienced and put them into a very tough piece. Look at your internal teams and how can you move people up, right, through the group too. Because that's where I've seen this fail before. They've brought people to teams, they just can't hack it, and it costs, it drags down both the person as well as both teams because they don't have the resources, or it's a new person, too many questions. So look to make what I call those kind of double trades around the organization where you move another group over. I think that probably is the essential piece too. Also, don't be afraid that if it's not working out well, change out the people, right? In a nice way, right? You can say, hey, look, we sent Morgan down there. Morgan, that was good. Maybe, this may not be for you. We're going to move someone else down.
Yeah.
And positively, what we do is we always pretty much don't tell them any given time. We say, look, we'd like you to move over this. It's going to be a rotation. It could be anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks, and we'll keep you updated and get their acceptance. That way, if they have to move on to something different, we can take them out. Or if we need to keep them longer because they're doing really well, we can have that conversation. So it's also making sure you set the correct expectations with the people, right? Also too, making things like, yes, you will be going back to the phone someday. So, and understand, or if I get really busy on the phone, I might have to yank you. I'm not going to yank you every 2 minutes, like get on the phone, handle a claim, get on the phone, but it could be a day a week, and try to get that. Also, that's the thing, try to get that organized. If you feel like you're going to be pulling people left and right, you're going to get nothing done.
Yes,
so what I've done, like in this current thing, is pretty much Mondays they're on the phones. What I've done in other cases, I've split the team in half. I said, okay, you people might be on the phones Monday and Tuesday, and then you guys will be on the phones Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, and the other days you'll be doing the back office, and everyone does back office on Friday, something like that. That's
Right.
one thing too. If you start jerking people back to roles, it's very inefficient, and you'll burn the people out and not get there. So yeah, I think the most important thing is just be realistic in what you move, what work you want to put the people into, and then feel free to kind of, trade the people out if necessary in a respectful way as well, and how you set that up.
Of course, I think that's that's a, and have you seen I don't know, better staff engagement or better kind of well-being, or just your staff are better engaged because they feel, perhaps to a certain degree, there's a career path for them to be able to learn more things. Have you seen that improvement since you've done this sharing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, yes, the career path has helped. We talked about it a little bit earlier. Either people who have found opportunities or realize this is not for them, but they got that free trial before. It's much better than getting a job and being in it a week and go, oh my God, I made a big mistake. But also people have just gone there and they've come back, and I've actually heard these things in teams, and they said, boy, you know what? I didn't understand in the back office, they have to deal with this. So, this is what we should do in the front office. Like just getting their peers together. Like we're putting a lot of pressure in that office because we forget to ask one question or forget to fill in one field correctly. And vice versa too. The back office people, they'll start meeting with the phone people, and they'll say, well, what's it like on the phones? And they'll tell them what they go through. So there's always a greater appreciation. People always think the grass is greener, like, oh, the people on the phones, it's a very easy job. You just stand there and you just talk to people. Then they kind of realize what it's like day in and day out, being on a schedule, all that too. And same thing at the back office. The phone people say, oh, it's so easy. They don't have to worry about a schedule. They can go get coffee when they want. Then they actually work it and realize, hey, boom, something happened. There was a system problem. We got, instead of getting 50 requests, we have 1,500 requests we got to knock out in the next 2 days, and we got to burn through it. And understanding like that's different. So just the appreciation of what the other side is going through, one gives them, they better work with each other. And also two, they try to say, hey, how can I help? Didn't know that was a problem. And that's an easy fix. Some things are bigger fixes, but sometimes like, boy, that's easy. We can do that like that.
That's probably the aha moment, isn't it? That
right, exactly.
One of the byproducts of this is your teams work better closely, and you actually improve processes.
Yeah.
And the data flow, because it makes it easier for each side because you appreciate each side. I mean, it's a fascinating story, and I think more and more organizations are going down this path. They're trying to figure out, almost changing it from being departmental or product into customer focused. So what's the customer journey looking like, which is effectively what you've done, is you've been able to manage that based on how the customer interacts with you. So it's a really fascinating journey you've been on, and you've clearly been through this number of times throughout your career and kind of honed it. And it's fascinating and valuable for other peers and other listeners of ours who want to go down this path as well. So before we wrap up, Tom, I want to ask you a question, because I'm very curious about this, and I've been asking a lot of key operational leaders and game changers like yourself. What do you think the future looks like for operations? If you're going to put a crystal ball in the next 5 years, what do you think it's going to look like?
Next 5 years, I mean, it's really changed. And one thing I was reflecting on earlier was, when we first started having like online banking and even back to IVRs and things like that, you had to do this huge push to try to migrate customers to it.
Yeah.
Now it's the opposite. Customers are complaining that your systems aren't good enough. Like, why do I have to talk to somebody? Why isn't your digital system better this way? Isn't that? And I've seen this in a couple of places I've worked. So that switch, like, I don't quite know when that happened from how we could, people want to be digitally engaged. I think that's one thing that we have to be sure is, but not everyone does. So we have to be ready for how the customers want to come at us, per se, right? In a nice way, right? There are customers who want to become digitally engaged, right? And we have to make sure our tools capture that and that we can actually address those things in the way they want to see it. But at the same time, we have to be available in the traditional ways when something doesn't go wrong. And as I tell my phone people, more and more people want to be digitally engaged. So when they contact you, for example, on the phones, they're already a little aggravated they couldn't do it themselves.
Yeah.
So you have to keep that in mind, not take it personally, and figure out what was the issue that prevented them from happening. Was, maybe it's a capability, maybe something that the customer didn't do correctly, whatever, enjoy it. So I think we have to be open for all these different channels the customer to come in. And I don't think they're going to settle on one channel in the future. I think it's going to be kind of this omni-channel thing that we're going to have to deal with. And we have to make sure that, to the point of how do we figure out how do we work it? I don't necessarily think it's having an omni-channel rep who's handling emails, chats, and phone calls all in the same thing, because we've tried that. That doesn't always work the best. But we do need to, be more integrated. I mean, one thing I see in operations coming down the road too is making sure that, if a customer does something digitally, I want my reps to know that it occurred, so that when the customer calls in, the customer shouldn't have more information than you do.
Of course.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the challenges. Sometimes the technology will move so fast, is we're making sure we're integrated with all that technology to know what they're doing. And again, customers, as I kind of said earlier today too, customers have a lot more information available about themselves because of our digital channels and all digital channels. People, doing a lot of the credit check programs and things like that. So they're getting lots of information. It'll sometimes trigger concerns, which might or might not be valid, but they need to and want to contact us, and we have to be able to answer them. And again, a lot of this stuff, like I said, can come really quickly. If a new service comes on board, there's a massive kind of data breach, we'll get a lot of this very quickly, where we didn't used to have that kind of impact. It would come in more dribbles. Now it can come in and kind of really as a hard slam, and then we'll recover through it. But I think, just being ready to adjust to it too. I mean, if anything, with the pandemic, with lots of things, of course, negative across the pandemic, but we did lots to learn things. My team was not remote. We're now 100% remote. We have no plans to go back. We're actually finding this model's working better for us. Something that if you had asked me in early 2020, I said, yeah, that's an interesting idea that'll probably never happen.
Of course.
Necessity made us do it, but now through that, we've actually performed it. So again, I think the cycle changes are a lot quicker now. And you just have to be ready to say, yeah, what worked yesterday might not work tomorrow. And what's going to work tomorrow, you don't even know about today.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's a fascinating anecdote there around, you're 100% working from or hybrid, I guess, to a degree, which is really, really interesting. It's interesting because there's a lot of commentary around the world about how do we bring people back into the office, and that's a different topic for another day. But it's fascinating to hear your take on that.
If we hadn't done to this model, it would have been harder for me to move some of this work. So, for example, when I was more office paper based, I had a lot of my phone people in South Carolina, a lot of my back office in Northern New Jersey. People weren't doing that commute every day. But now that everything had to go virtual anyway, if the person lived in Northern New Jersey or lived in South Carolina or lived in California, I could get them to work. I couldn't get them that work before this. They had to be co-located in the same building. So that's also helped.
That's a very good point. And actually that's accelerated by the digital transformation of us as consumers and the way we want to engage. So, I mean, I actually think the direction that you've been able to demonstrate at TD Bank and your previous experiences is really where, to some degree, operations is going to head, because, I see a future where, operations departments and service operations teams are only going to get smaller, but the resources that you need are going to have to become more flexible, and you're going to have to deal with them across your customer journey, rather than isolated. And, you've demonstrated, which I think really interestingly, how you can flex all those resources, which are two very different groups, in a way that does drive business impact. So, I mean, thank you so much for sharing that story.
Oh, it's great to speak with you again, Bhavesh.
Really, really good. And I think there's a really interesting whole bunch of tips there for other listeners to think about, well, how would I do that if I was going to move to that, that more flexible model? So thank you so much, Tom. I really appreciate it. And I thank also everybody else for listening and for joining us. And please do check in on more of our episodes on Ops Game Changers. And you're going to hear so many more fascinating insights like we have with Tom thinking about the sharing of capacity between front and back office, as well as a whole bunch of other topics. So please do check it out, and thank you so much for now, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Today's Ops Game Changers podcast was brought to you by ActiveOps. We'd love to hear your thoughts. You can do that by sharing them on our Facebook, LinkedIn, or X feeds, or you can comment in the comment section of the YouTube version of this podcast. And if you've enjoyed what you've heard, please do like and subscribe and check back in soon to hear more valuable insights from other inspiring leaders in operations. Thanks again for listening, and goodbye.